So now I think we're ready to start. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Bianca Buzea. I'm the Developer Relations Engineer at Balancer. And today with me, I have some special guests. I have Vitto Rivabella, lead developer experience at Alchemy. Hi, Vitto.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me today.
Steph Orpilla, developer relations engineer at Polygon. Leilani product manager at Covalent. And Nader Dabit, developer relations director of Aave and Lens, and also founder of Developer DAO. Okay, so we're gonna start with some specific anecdotes and stories from your experience as DevRels, and then we're gonna look at the broader image. So my first question for you is, how did you become a DevRel? What's your story in 1 to 2 sentences?
Want an honest answer is by mistake? No. Actually, I come from an art background. So before joining Web3, I was just weird feedback. I was a VFX supervisor in the movie industry, so I was making like 3D models for the movie industry. And when I got into coding, my biggest issue, and I think a lot of people are approaching coding have this issue, is actually understanding documentation or understanding where to tap into, right? Web3 is such a complex technology. You need to understand where to start. You need to understand what kind of technologies you want to use. You need to understand what kind of products you want to use. And so very generally, what happened is that I started translating documentation and creating content on Twitter, and I started noticing that a lot of people found value into this, and were like, wow, now I understand how this works. Now I understand how to develop this and that. And of course, network effect, I think social medias used the right way are very, very powerful. And what happened is that I ended up running panels and spaces on Twitter mainly. And at a certain point, I remember Elan from Alchemy, she's our project manager, at the time was lead DevRel. She was like, oh my God, we should definitely collaborate. I was like, well, I probably want to apply. And then I met that guy there, that is that guy in tech, of course, Albert. And we started working together and met Nader, Steph, started working together as DevRels. But yeah, no, that's the story, super short. It was super enjoying to teach people how to develop in a very digestible way. But then we can get into it later.
For me, it really was an accident. I was a software developer at a FANG company, and it's actually Patrick's fault that I'm in crypto. Sorry, Patrick. But I got really bored at my job, and I saw either a tutorial or something on the Chainlink blog, and I didn't actually finish it. I never finished tutorials, even though I'm sure they're very, very great and high quality. Love you, Patrick. But I didn't finish it, and instead of building a lottery, I ended up building something totally different. And I realized that I like hacking and exploring, and it just didn't align well with what I was doing in Web 2. I like the explore phase of development more than the expand and extract phases. So I just kind of realized I wanted to be on the cutting edge. And DevRel is really great for that because it lets you play with so many different technologies. The whole job is to try out new things and learn new things. So it's been very fun.
I fell into this by accident as well. It's quite a Web3 journey, I guess. I actually joined Covalent first a couple of years ago in the Alchemist program that they had, which was a community program for learning more about blockchain. And I didn't really have any technical background. I still kind of don't. I studied economics. But in that program, I was learning how to use the API. And I actually just got really interested that it was something that I could teach myself. And I got kind of deeper and deeper and deeper, and then met a couple people from the company, including Harish, who's actually our lead DevRel, who's here. And I was really fortunate to be able to get to learn from people around me and actually come on and join full-time in a full-time role. So I got a job out of it. And then once I was in the company, I moved from marketing, product, DevRel, kind of a bit of everything, which is also, I guess, a bit of a classic Web3 story. And I just really fell in love with the developer experience and going to hackathons and actually seeing how incredible it is that people want to build something nobody's built before, explore new tools, really help each other, have these fun teams, and also not needing to really have too much experience. That's what I'm trying to do now in this space, is kind of make it accessible for people like me, I guess, who just want to learn more and are curious and get easily intimidated. So I'm trying to kind of make it less intimidating too.
So I started getting into developer education pretty early on. I founded a couple of meetups and coding schools in Mississippi, where I'm from, where we don't really have a lot of that stuff, especially back in the day, and kind of naturally evolved into opening a training company where I taught software engineers how to build mobile apps using React Native and JavaScript. And one of my clients was Amazon, and then Amazon hired me to do DevRel at that time because I was getting kind of bored doing the same thing over and over. And then I got bored with cloud, and I discovered blockchain and Web3. Really, really fascinated by it, and have been in this space for about 2 years. First joined the Graph protocol, then I worked briefly with Celestia. Now I'm with Lens Protocol and Aave, and I'm having a lot of fun. And I'm really honored to be here with a really great panel of people here. So thank you.
So I heard a lot on this panel, what specific actions you guys took and what was your journey. I would like now to know, what are the specific skills you think a DevRel should have?
Yeah, I think that it really is a combination of technical skills and non-technical skills usually for the most part, but I think it depends on the size of the DevRel team. If you have a very large DevRel team, people can be more specialized in what they're good at, so they don't need to be good at everything, and the smaller teams would be better suited with a well-rounded person. But I think if you are just generally wanting to be good, you want to be good at coding to some extent, being able to explain technologies to developers, and also being a good communicator and someone that's good with community and stuff like that. So if you have those two characteristics and then you start having the focus of building in public and sharing what you're doing, I think those three things put together typically make a good DevRel.
Yeah, I completely agree, but I would also just add, from my perspective, just a willingness to really actually want to learn from the people that you're also helping, because I feel like it's really two-way. So for me, what's been really nice is anyone that comes to the booth or that I meet at events like this often teaches me something more than I know, and then I can accumulate that and share it with community members. And I feel like the circulation of knowledge is what really, really is great. And if you're willing to be a part of that and keep that going, then you can boost your developer community a lot and make it an exciting space to be, aside from just the hard skills that they may need. But kind of retention, from what I've seen, you need kind of something more. You need a little bit of magic and spark, and for it to be fun for people. So I try to do that with the content that I create, and I don't know if I do a good job of that, but I definitely try to do that. And yeah, just to make it an enjoyable experience.
For me, I think it's the ability to learn and be curious. I don't think our jobs stop where our companies do, if that makes sense. You have to understand more of the ecosystem. So keeping track of what launches are happening, Chainlink Functions, for example, launched this week. It's huge and it's going to be incredible. So I think being willing to learn about things outside of your day-to-day job is important, because that way you can talk to developers and say, hey, I understand what you're asking. Here's this other solution that maybe you don't know about yet, and being that person who can guide them to something that will make their product make sense and have better product market fit, and just integrate with solutions that exist instead of rebuilding the wheel.
Totally. I loved all of your answers. And I think the thing with DevRels is that there are two distinct parts, right? On one hand, you're a marketer. For developers, you're a marketer. And for marketing, you're a developer. And there are different skills for both groups. So as a marketer and a developer, first, you need to be able to translate complex technical things into human digestible words. And that's kind of the most complex part, because once you start being curious, once you start experimenting with these technologies, once you start learning about these technologies, and that requires some technical background. So definitely, if you want to go on a bullet point list on what you need to know as a DevRel, is probably knowing how to code. And then there is this other part, is knowing how to write documentations, knowing how to create content that can teach other people to code. Now, on the other hand, there is this development part, and I totally agree with you. You need to be curious. And that means a lot of things, especially in Web3. Our main and core job is onboarding people into our ecosystem, not just into our companies, right? My daily job is not just onboarding people into using Alchemy, that is kind of limiting, but is onboarding people into developing Web3. And that requires a lot of curiosity, a lot of willingness to share, a lot of willingness to explore, a lot of willingness to understand how the underlying technology works. So to TLDR your question, I think on one hand is being able to connect with people, being curious to learn from other people, being curious to interact with them, understand what are their needs. So it's kind of like a therapist some way. On the other hand, yeah, for sure, right? You talk with these people, and sometimes the hardest part when you're talking with people is not just asking them, yo, what do you need? Because people were like, won't answer you. It's understanding what their needs are. And then going back to your company, your engineers, and be like, okay, wait a second, this is what actually people need. This is what actually we should actually develop. On the other hand, as a marketer, you need to promote this space on behalf of your company.
I heard a lot about learning marketing strategies, learning about different technologies, learn and be curious, proposed by Steph, which I totally second that. Now I'm curious, like, how do you guys think your own skills have evolved while being in this role?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
How your skills have evolved during this role as DevRel?
No one wants to answer this question. I'm a completely different person. But not just because of, since I started being a DevRel, but since I joined Web3. Web3 is a lot, right? You have a lot of different people coming from a lot of different backgrounds. You have artists, you have developers, like die-hard, like low-level engineers that are talking things that I have no idea what they're talking about. So I think, first and foremost, I became a better listener. I learned how to ask questions. That's really hard. It's not just like asking random questions, but it's like asking the right question at the right time and asking, things that really you want to know about. That's the first thing, definitely super important, learning developers marketing. There is this book, I didn't really read the book, but I love the title, that is Developers Marketing Doesn't Exist. That is so true, and this is something you need to learn, because developers are the hardest to be sold, right? When they see an advertisement on Twitter, they just skip over. When they see an advertisement on YouTube, they just skip over. That's not how it works. You need to find a way to interact with them. And then, of course, as a developer, experimenting a lot, learning how to code better and coding clearly, because at that point, you're sharing your code with other people. So you're not just like, okay, I want to make my code the most optimized possible. It's like, how can I make my code readable? And on top of that, creating content. So all of these things together, and plus, that's really difficult. I don't know, folks, if you had the same experience, but being in between marketing and engineering, it's hard, right? Because you need to translate these things. And marketer won't understand what engineering is saying, and engineering won't understand what marketing is saying. And so, I think communication is the biggest thing I learned.
Yep. Marketing is definitely like something that I didn't have skills in before. I talked to product and project people and other devs, so I was used to explaining things very technically, but you have to also be able to talk non-technically so that people understand what you're saying. And oftentimes, you're the person communicating between the core engineering team and the marketing team so that they're not saying the wrong things, which sometimes does happen. But I think I've grown in those ways, and also just getting used to kind of the social media aspects of this job. Like I said, I came from development, and so now it's just different getting used to being like, okay, now I have to have a YouTube thumbnail going, I didn't know this about Solidity, or like top 5
Patrick.
tips. I'm not calling anyone out. But so that's something I definitely have been growing at and still am not great at, but I learned from my peers and they're great at this. So,
I think for me, the biggest learning curve and the skill that I've probably developed most in this job is trying to just explain concepts and systems and kind of the frameworks of things rather than actually, writing the code or saying line by line, this is what you do. Because that way, when I can create some sort of like analogy that everybody understands, or really simplify the concept, or break it down into like a really high level explanation, I can kind of reuse that, I guess, when it comes to talking to engineering and marketing or all different departments. But it's also like trying to make the content approachable. So again, I know I go back to like learners and beginners a lot, but as somebody that's in that position, I don't want to read like 2 sentences and say, okay, I'm not going to understand this. So I guess trying to make everything really high level all the time, which is really hard to do, especially the more specific and the more granular you can go with a tutorial, but really bringing it back and just always trying to make things simplistic and go back to the roots and like why it's important is always something that I'm working on.
I think that one of the things for me that's changed the most is how I approach learning a new topic. And there's like hacks that you just start learning over time. And the more that you can learn and distill and teach, the more effective you are at scale. So if we start kind of identifying these little hacks, so things might be like a new piece of software comes out, you want to be someone who understands and kind of teaches that. You kind of know which GitHub repos to look, you know how to search for things, you know how to kind of like take all of these technologies and distill them down for yourself to understand them in order to kind of teach them. So for me, it's been more about like learning quickly and like learning different hacks to learn a lot more quickly for me.
So we talked about evolving skills. Now let's look a bit about evolving priorities. And this question is for you, Nader. So I would love to see more DevRels out there at the C-level, something that you're doing. So can you talk a bit about how your priorities have evolved since you joined place at the C-level, at the C-table?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate goal is to be effective at scale, and you kind of completely will be changing your priorities every day, and as things change, different companies change. So for me, it's been more about like what are the most scalable ways for me to be effective and help people, and I kind of reevaluate that every day. And also, depending on where I work, it's also going to change a lot. So at Aave and Lens, it's different than when I was at Celestia, and that was different than I was at the Graph. So I think the unfortunate answer for me would be it depends, but in general, it's about trying to be effective at scale, which I think is ultimately going to help the most people.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to add about evolving priorities? Maybe Vitto, you with Alchemy University, Shield Alchemy University.
Do you want me to shield Alchemy University? So, I can shield it, so subscribe to Alchemy University, university.alchemy.com, it's completely free. No, just kidding. I think I love what you said, that is being effective at scale. This is super hard. Like, as a DevRel, you get pinged constantly with a bunch of things. Again, you are the point of contact between engineering and marketing, and they both have different priorities every single time. So you need first and foremost to understand how to context switch. We were talking about this, I think, a couple of days ago. That context switching as a DevRel is really hard, but it's also a priority, right? Because you need to learn that to be effective at your job. But I think on top of that, when I started as a DevRel, I felt like, okay, being big on social media is great. Talking with people, creating content is amazing. But I think, especially in Web3, my priority over time became education. Education in Web3 is so important. Why that? Because we need to onboard more people. So that was the first thing. But second, also learning how to communicate effectively, being ruthless with your time, understanding how to handle your schedule in a way that doesn't, of course, make you completely crazy, and at the same time is still effective at scale, and you can help all the departments. So priorities change every single day based on the market, based on the demand, based on the people that you're working with, based on your ideas. As a DevRel, you have a lot of ownership, right? So you can think, okay, this is a tool that we should develop, this is something that we should talk about, and that becomes a priority because you understand there is like a market gap or a need there. So I think over time, even today, my priorities are constantly changing based on, what the people need and what the users need.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think scaling has a different meaning in DevRel than it does in development. And part of scaling for me is making things self-service, both internally and externally. So like I need self-service things to give to my marketing team and to my developer teams so that they're talking to each other effectively and they know what the other people know about each other. And then I need resources and documents to make self-service all the new products and developments for our developer communities because they need to know kind of like where the collection of resources is, where the docs are, what's up to date and what's not. So having all of those things in docs that I can easily share has been really effective for me, because instead of explaining something to someone, I'm just like, oh, check out this doc, or look at this, this is where I have it. And that way they have a point, so they don't have to ask me a question until they get through it. And then if they still have the question, I'm totally open to answering it, and I'll add it to the doc.
Super quickly, I think this is super important. Can you expand a little bit on what self-serving content is and how it helps you every day?
So self-service is just something that people can get to without bothering me. So basically anything I'm doing, I want to have written down. There's this concept of bus factor in engineering, or I guess the nicer way to put it is like lottery factor. Like if I win the lottery, I'm peacing out, or if I get hit by a bus, I'm also peacing out. So hopefully I documented everything that my coworkers and everyone needs to know so that they're not fully dependent on me.
I would also add, priorities are definitely always changing in the DevRel role, because you're so dependent on the product itself. And especially if you're in a fast-moving company or if you're an earlier stage company, I mean, you have a general roadmap, and sometimes people really stick to that, and other times something comes out of the blue and you just add a new feature in 2 weeks, and you need to create content so that people know how to use that. So being adaptable, I think, is like a really, really huge asset, especially in DevRel, because not only do you need to figure that stuff out, then you also need to be able to help other people figure that stuff out. And sometimes you're not going to know everything up until like maybe the day that it happens. Miscommunications, who knows? But things move really fast in Web3, so definitely will keep you on your toes.
So far we looked mostly at your specific anecdotes, experiences. Let's go big, broad, and look at the bigger picture. So why are DevRel people important for the Web3 ecosystem?
Right off the bat, Web3 is like incredibly difficult to understand for a lot of people, even if they are developers and have a developer background. I mean, Web3 is like a completely different beast. If you walk around and look at the booths, I mean, we've come a long way, but even the way that we describe the protocols and the projects and the blockchains and everything, it's very full of jargon and different terminology that people aren't used to, and that just permeates to like any single person that's coming into Web3, whether it's a developer or not. So especially in terms of like increasing adoption and getting people into this ecosystem and getting people building, it's super, super important to have DevRel people, I think, who can simplify onboarding and show you some kind of like end goals or what completed projects look like, give you inspiration, anything that makes it easier to see why the work matters or how you can actually get from point A to point B.
So I would add, that's a really good answer, by the way, that essentially when you look at Web 2, quote unquote, the way that developer marketing works there, you know, it's about network effects, because you want as many people building on your product as possible. Therefore, you can kind of have metrics and make money, obviously. But I think it's even amplified in Web3, because the more users that you have on your protocol, the more valuable your protocol becomes, the more people then come to build on it. So it's kind of this snowball effect. So if you can get out in front of your competition and you can kind of get more people using and building, it starts becoming kind of a really hard to breach moats that you might be able to build for a protocol that's definitely more, you know, apparent in the blockchain and the Web3 space, because of the way that these networks are valued based often on usage. And since we're just building protocols, the more developers that are building on your protocol, the more apps that will be built, therefore the more users. So it just increases that kind of snowball effect. So.
I think great answers. I love that. I think there's another thing that is more low level, that is just like, if you have to explain something, that can be a technology, that can be your community. Well, if you ask a marketer probably to talk about count abstraction, that's probably not, it won't be the best explanation for many different reasons. It's a matter of skills, right? And if you ask an engineer, a very low-level engineer, to talk about a community or form a community, that probably won't work super well either, just because their skills are completely different, and they dedicated their lives to other things, learning other things. Me personally, I'm a mediocre engineer and mediocre marketing, but the two things together actually make a good combo. Because if you ask me to explain something like a protocol, I'm able more or less to explain it in a way that is digestible. If you ask me to create a community or start posting content and creating content, I can more or less do it probably because I'm more, like, I don't know, energetic than for a skill. It's a skill. So I think DevRels, again, are super important, and it's just because they're DevRel, because they put together developer and relations. And so they right in the middle between marketers and engineers again. And this bridge is almost too much undervalued in many different ways. I cannot see a world where all of these users, tons of these people that are here today would have been onboarded into Web3 without the presence of amazing DevRels like the ones that we have here today.
I love the idea of combining different skills to get your superpower. Maybe now we'll look a bit and each of us go around and talk about your favorite perk about being a DevRel.
I think it's this one, exactly what we're living right now. And so having contacts and interacting with the community, breathing what they're breathing, right? Understanding what they're building, understanding more, having a view, a very high level view on the future of this domain. And talking with people. I personally love talking with people. I personally love learning from them. I personally love meeting bright minds like the ones that we have today on the panel. And yeah, I couldn't imagine myself sitting like 12 hours a day in front of a computer without having an interaction. Whereas I can imagine myself sitting 6 hours in front of a computer coding, and then the other 6 hours talking with people about all the things that I coded, or the things that our engineers have coded. And yeah, that's probably the best part.
I love being the first builder on something new because I get to kind of tinker, and I also get to put on my product hat and be like, oh, this is what's missing, or why aren't you doing this? So I get to be curious about that, and also give people the first examples of how to use a technology. I don't understand things usually unless I see an example or like a design example. I think that's how a lot of us learn. We're not coming up with things from scratch, or at least we're validating our ideas by like looking at the ways other people who are super smart are doing them. So it's interesting to me to be one of those examples, and then to see how people take that and challenge some of my assumptions. And I like working with like super talented devs like all of you. That's probably the best part.
I think my favorite perk is, like, at the end of the day or at the end of the hackathon, actually just seeing the completed projects and getting like the wow factor from things I've never thought about, or people that completely like come out of nowhere and surprise you and used your product to do this thing that you never knew was possible. And also, it's that like amazing connection that you get when somebody passionate is telling you about something that they created, and I get to experience that a lot, which I really love. It makes me like a happy person to see other people's work come to life and be a tiny part of that. So it's a really gratifying job, actually. I really enjoy all of that aspect.
Yeah, mine, there's a lot of stuff to love about this job. You get to travel and all this other stuff is cool, but mine is very similar to hers. You know, I was a self-taught developer. Everything that I learned to become employed was due to people going out there, teaching, open sourcing their code, helping answer stuff on Twitter. All this stuff was for free. And once I became in the position to do that, I wanted to give back. And essentially, DevRel is getting paid to do that, to teach people and help them. And when someone comes up to you and they're like, hey, I got a job, or I built a company and sold it, or whatever, because of something that you did, it's like a really gratifying thing. And that's honestly one of the most enjoyable parts about this job.
You guys have been selling very well the job of DevRel. We're at the end of the time, but one quick tip for someone who wants to become a DevRel.
I'll start. Build in public.
Yeah, obviously that, I guess can't argue with that.
Learn in public, build in public. It's both of those things.
Yeah, and take advantage of events like this, I guess. Talk to as many people as you can, learn from as many people as you can, and then you'll be able to spew that knowledge to other people as well.
Yep, all of that.
So I think the biggest thing is just getting started. And I think lots of people are like, oh, how do I get started being a DevRel? Well, just start creating content. Just posting, build in public, post what you're learning about, explain what you've learned, explain a code that you've written. Talk with people, try to understand what they're building. So it's really about go public, do not care. Like, everyone makes mistakes. I think the biggest problem is that people are like, oh my God, if I go public and start posting my own things, people will judge me. Yes, but people will judge you anyway. So just stop worrying about that, right? Just start posting, start putting your stuff out there. People will appreciate that. And when you have the first person coming to you and be like, yo, I started in Web3 because of you, folks, you all know it's the best feeling ever. You're like, wow, I changed someone else's life.
Unfortunately, we're at the end of the time. I would have loved to continue, but let's give a big round of applause to our panelists.